Okay, hello, good morning everybody. Welcome to the first panel of Mapping the Magazine. I've been honored to participate in the organization of this wonderful conference with a very brilliant team. So just to say, I'm Teresa Mendes Flores. I'm a researcher at Nova University and at the Communication Department of Lusófona University. And this session will be debating magazine trends. We'll have three great presentations, and I'm sure it will be as illuminating as James O's conference we've just heard. Before we start, let me remind you some rules of the session. Although we are all getting very used to this video conference mediations, but it's never, we have to remind you the rules. So participants must make sure that they have their microphones and their cameras off during the session to ensure better connection, of course, with the exception of the person who is presenting. Your advice to use headphones, also important for the presenters to avoid other noises. All questions will be addressed at the end of the three presentations, and questions must be sent through the chat. You may find the chat in the line at the bottom of the screen. You must send questions to all participants so that we all see the questions and we avoid to repeat some questions. So please check if you are not sending the question to a particular person. If it is not me, I will not see the question. I will try to ask as many questions as possible within the time. So let me introduce the first presenter. She's Milena Sternadori. She's Associate Professor at the Department of Journalism and Creative Media Industries of Texas Tech University in the United States of America. And she has extensively published about gender and media. Her most popular book is Mediated Eros, Sexual Scripts Within and Across Cultures. She published in 2015. And she will be launching at the conference, at our conference, a new book, Watered with Tim Holmes, the Handbook of Magazine Studies. We are looking forward to read and expecting to attend to this presentation. She will present now the paper entitled Browse Our Collection, the Commodified Materiality of Print Magazines. Thank you, Milena. You may start now.
Good morning, everyone. So I will share my screen here in a second. I just wanted to give a warning to all participants that I have 10 cats and 3 dogs. And unfortunately, perhaps I did not have enough Red Bulls to think about headphones. So I apologize if you hear any cat or dog noises. Hopefully they will keep it quiet since it's still, still dark here. So here is my, I'm sorry, I need to return to sharing screen. So can you see my screen? Specifically the PowerPoint on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. I just hope to minimize this. Excellent. Okay. So the paper or the subject I am talking about, still fumbling here. I'm so sorry. I just want to go to present. And for whatever reason, that's, oh, here we go.
Put it bigger if you want. Oh, there it is.
There we go. Okay. So I chose to discuss commodified materiality or just came up with the idea because of the New Yorker tote. I'm not sure how popular the New Yorker tote is in the rest of the world, but it is extremely popular in the United States. and it is sort of a symbol of status. So just briefly to explain what it is a bag that you can take to the beach or just take around instead of a regular purse, and it has the New Yorker brand, the New Yorker logo on it. So to give you a few examples of commodified materiality, in fact, first I will start by explaining what I mean by materiality. Materiality is physicality. So I'm referring to all physical objects that are linked to either magazines or magazine brands, which, as I will explain, are not precisely the same. Obviously, print issues of magazines are material objects that are being sold, so they're commodified, they have a sale, they have a price attached to them. But there are a number of other objects that magazines are selling these days. And here are just a few examples. For the first one is a $40 phone cover from the Condé Nast store of a New Yorker cover. So if you are, again, snobbish enough or want to claim a certain status, you could carry the New Yorker tote and also have a phone in the New Yorker phone cover. I would say my second example is my favorite. This is a baby onesie from Mademoiselle, which is a magazine that's no longer published in the United States. Its last issue was published in 2001. So the fascinating thing to me is that although the magazine no longer exists, the brand exists, and there are branded objects that are still bringing revenues and profit to the publisher. And the last example, at least, well, just for this page, is a futon from the Cosmo Living collection. You can find it on Amazon. Actually, currently it is out of stock. It's $729, and it is branded as Cosmo Living. So it is a specific designer line created by the magazine or the magazine brand. And I would say for a futon, I think $729 is a little above average as a price. So materiality, again, is physicality, and there are a couple of things to consider here. So we have always thought about magazines, well, I guess if you're from an older generation, I have always thought of magazines as physical objects because I personally love having print issues. I store way too many magazines in my office. But we're also used to thinking of magazines as communities. This is something that is very much a theme in the current magazine scholarship. So scholars have consistently discussed magazines as imaginary communities, reader communities, brand communities, but essentially communities because magazines establish connections, stronger connections among readers and between readers and editors, publishers, than other types of media. Well, so considering the current trend of digitalization, I am arguing here that magazines are increasingly relying on material objects that are being sold as sort of luxury goods to survive the digital disruptions. And in that process, they're not, those physical objects are not only status symbols, but they could also be seen as objects that reinforce communities, or they could also be seen as objects of social differences. So a community is not necessarily a wonderful thing. I mean, it can be, and in many cases it is, but a community also exists in many cases to sort of create an in-group and protect it from outsiders, or to emphasize the difference between one group and another. So the essential argument, as you can see on the screen, is that material objects branded or endorsed by magazines, along with their print issues, are status commodities that reinforce social differences. I would argue this is the case even in social environments where most magazine material objects are the print issues. So that's not exactly the case in the US, but in countries that are less individualistic, print magazines are often used as, they have sort of a barter or a gift exchange value. So you can share a magazine with friends or family. And again, by very individualistic Western standards, that may not improve your status, but in other societies, in other cultures, sharing, being kind, being generous, and contributing to the community are precisely the things that bring along status. So let me get back to giving you examples, because there are just so many. So this is a pair of jeans, and the brand is Public Service Apparel, or PSA. This is a brand that was created by the Good Media Company, which publishes Good Magazine, and Upworthy, which is an online magazine or a website. And they created the brand in 2018. So this is just a pair of basic blue jeans, and it costs 150 pounds. Excuse me. So I think this is an interesting example in which someone may not necessarily advertise. There is no, there is no logo on the blue jeans. There is no way to know that that particular pair of blue jeans costs that much money, and that it is contributing to a specific cause. But the person wearing the blue jeans would know that. Excuse me. So that brings me to sort of the theoretical framework for this essay, which is the Marx-Baudrillard value categories. They're really more often associated with Baudrillard, but they were originally grounded in Marxist theory. So the idea is that in a society that is focused on consumption, or in the case of Marx, more, the argument was more from this point of view of production and who has the means of production. We can argue that every object has three different types of values. The first one is utility, and that's the obvious use of any object. So a print magazine, its function is to be read. For a phone case, its function is to protect your phone. Or for, I guess, for a baby onesie, the function is to have a baby wear it. The exchange value is essentially the price. If it can be sold, if it can be bought, a product has a price and an exchange value. And finally, the category that's most important for my argument is the category of sign value, which is linked to prestige. So does the product say anything about its owner? Does it signify prestige? So the sign value is higher the more you spend on a product, generally. So I will give a few more examples here, but something I wanted to mention in terms of digital disruptions is that magazines' most obvious utility in the age of digital disruptions has been decreasing. Even when you think about magazines, not just as print editions, but when you think of magazines as media that analyze, entertain, provide unique information, connect, many of those functions now have been taken over by, just in general, the internet or social media. Many people might assume that it is quite easy to find information, analysis, and entertainment online. And so in that sense, if the utility value of magazines is decreasing, again, not just speaking of print, but in general, the only way, or perhaps the most obvious way to me, is what magazine publishers are beginning to do, which is to focus on material objects that have a high sign value as a way to survive. And of course, this argument, you know, I would love to see quality magazines continue to publish, and if it takes selling some baby onesies, okay. But I think it is also important to recognize that those sorts of products are linked to social inequality and to prestige and status. So going back to examples, which all of which, you know, have informed my argument, because I have thought about those examples. Why would someone buy that? Would I personally buy that? I'm so sorry. I haven't spoken. I haven't really used my teaching voice in a couple of months, and so apparently I have lost it. So this is a black hoodie that is has the Vogue brand, as you can see, but it is actually produced by a fashion label. And the thing that really gets me is that slogan, waste not, want not, which one can interpret in a very 21st century yoga sense, in meaning, you know, be sustainable, do not be greedy, do not want more things, and so forth. But in fact, it is an 18th century British proverb about how to avoid poverty. So if you don't waste things, you will not ever be in need. You will not be poor. So a few more examples of magazine branded objects that have a sign value. So one is Wired magazine has an annual pop-up store. I believe they hold it during the holidays. But there is also an online store where where one could buy just any sort of a gadget, any sort of a technological invention product. As you can see in this picture, anything from a car to any sort of electronics. And so in this case, again, the car doesn't have the Wired magazine logo on it, but there is potentially status in saying, oh yeah, this was a car that is endorsed by Wired magazine, and so I bought it for Christmas at the holiday Wired holiday shop. I have to admit, I personally am a very willing participant in magazines' commodified materiality. So for example, when I want a new laptop, I go to my IT person at my college and I say, well, I want this laptop because it was the top laptop endorsed by PC Magazine. And it's an argument that shows I'm informed, I read PC Magazine, and I know what's good value for the money. So it's sort of, it is a way to get what I want, but it is also a way to sort of improve my status. And then another example, Current Driver magazine sells actual products branded with its own name. So this is a dash cam. Current Driver dash cams are not particularly popular on Amazon. They don't get very good ratings, but they're quite expensive, and apparently they continue to sell. So we could say, well, maybe this is just lifestyle magazines that are using commodifying material objects to bring additional revenues. Maybe, you know, so-called serious magazines would not be doing that. But in fact, here are two examples of political magazines. Again, all of my examples are from the United States. This is the culture I live in. This is what I know. The National Review, which is a conservative magazine, has a wine club that explicitly links the opportunity to support the fight against liberal media and other really bad, apparently liberal things by buying wine. So again, the wine, I mean, the National Review's name is not on the wine bottles, but for people who are members of the wine club, clearly there is an argument to be made that they feel that they're supporting a cause. So they have internalized the sign value of the purchase. And they can, of course, you know, have friends over and say, well, this is that wine I get from the National Review Wine Club, which again, if they have, you know, if they're shared political beliefs, that is going to have a substantial sign value. The second example is a tapestry, which was sold by The Nation. The Nation is a liberal magazine. It is titled Incantation for America. It is, from what I can tell, really beautiful, and it is already sold out. And The Nation, in fact, I would say, is perhaps the political magazine that has been the most commercially savvy, because they also have, well, they have a large online store with a number of objects, but they also sell cruises. So if you have ever subscribed to The Nation, you might get an email saying, hey, would you like to go on a $4,000 cruise to Cuba or St. Petersburg? And so obviously all of those revenues, all of those opportunities are pitched as this is helping the magazine. So I am now transitioning to something a little bit different, which is still the use of magazines and magazine branded objects as status symbols. But in this case, I want to specifically give the example of how magazine covers can be used to increase status. So in the US, there were two recent examples of public figures fabricating covers of Time magazine, because being on the cover of Time is just extremely prestigious. It's considered an honor, and it is not something that you can buy. If you're familiar with the song "The Cover of the Rolling Stone," there, you know, the lyrics explicitly say you can be wealthy, you can love your wealth, and you can buy everything, but you cannot buy being on the cover of the Rolling Stone. So there is a very unique value, sign value, attached to being on the cover of a magazine. And of course, you know, not everyone will ever expect or strive to be on the cover of a major magazine, but there are still elements of print editions, especially covers, that are being commodified for the masses. So they're so-called memory products, according to Carolyn Kitch, who who analyzed those sorts of products back in 2006. So they may be commemorative issues, Here is the Time commemorative issue from January 1st, 2000. Um, Here is a special issue of Ebony that was sort of one of the first to start presenting a new, different historical knowledge to its readers. So in this case, the Emancipation Proclamation, things that are not being taught in schools in the United States at the time, and even now, one could learn from special issues, historical issues of Ebony. And the final example, the New Yorker. This is the cover of the New Yorker from the week of 9/11. So I'm not sure if you can see quite well. That's sort of the idea of the cover, but there are two dark silhouettes. Those are the sort of the silhouettes of the World Trade Center towers. And it is a famous cover. And so, of course, there are art prints that you can purchase of that particular cover in a variety of products. Again, those are just a few examples. I could probably give dozens, but I just wanted to pick the ones that I find the most interesting and persuasive. And then, of course, there are other products that at the first glance, I would say, well, they're not extremely commodified. It's not, I mean, I love the New Yorker's calendar, cartoon calendars, because they really represent a shared humanity of sorts. If you're a pet owner, as I am, they're all sort of there's all sort of cartoon collections for owners of cats and dogs. There are cartoon collections for people who work in an office, and all of them sort of represent those shared absurdities. So you could say, well, okay, maybe those truly are community objects, but I would say, if you could spare $15 for something that is completely non-essential, such as a calendar, which in this day and age, most people have on their phone, on their computer, it is entirely electronic. It is still maybe a very low price, but still a sort of a luxury object that is not accessible to everyone. So finally, I would argue that magazine websites, of course, not all, but many in the West, and especially in the United States, which again is the environment with which I'm the most familiar, have literally become warehouses, commercial warehouses that sell material objects, which is what the word magazine originally meant. And materiality is now even more, it is more exclusive than it ever was, because digitization has become the norm. And so having something that is non-essential, we could all read the New Yorker online, or other magazines online, but so something that is non-essential material can be carried around, has a higher value nowadays. So I'm sorry if I went a little bit over time and also lost my voice along the way, but thank you so much. And I would love to hear your thoughts and questions.
Thank you, Milena. Now we're discussing your paper at the end after all the presentations. Now we're moving on to Carla Rodrigues Cardoso. She is a PhD in Communication Sciences and is currently the head of journalism graduation of Lusófona University. Her work focuses on journalism and news magazines. She published the book Seduzir ou Informar, to seduce or to inform. And she has been paying particular attention to news magazines covers approached as an apparatus. Today, she will be presenting the paper, News Magazine Transformations in the Digital Age, a case study with Donald Trump. Carla, please begin.
este que oh. Again.
Some technical issues. Carla, okay, she's there. She was with the wrong camera.
Yes, Tim, I have to Windows open, but the problem is that I have to do it because of things with the two
Okay, we
computers.
are seeing now
it can't be read properly in one, and then I had to open my laptop, and then I'm entered twice on Zoom.
Okay.
So that's the problem.
We are seeing your presentation now.
Yeah, I think everything. Okay, so first of all, thank you, Teresa, for the brief presentation. I want to thank you, Miglena. She almost terrified me because when I saw the Trump time pop up, I said, what did I do? Because I thought I had to put my presentation without notice. I'm very happy for being after Miglena's presentation because I think that we are going to have a lot of things to discuss. I have to be honest, I was not able to finish my full paper, so every inputs that you are going to give me are really precious because this time I went out of my comfort zone, and it reveals itself, this research, very challenging, and there is much more besides what I'm going to show and discuss. And even so, I think there are lots of things here right now. Just to introduce why did I thought about this paper with this magnificent title, this magazine, Transformation Digital Age. Well, everybody is worried about the future of magazines, and we that are at the Mapping the Magazine even more, for sure. It's going to be one of the topics of our talking circle tomorrow at 4 p.m. Sorry for the publicity. Everybody can send their questions and their topics, please. But this is a question that worries. And that was what started me thinking about the paper. In this case, only the presentation yet. So we can't. Sometimes I think people talk about digital journalism, but everything is digital now. Okay, I think everything is getting digital. I'm not saying that there are not print magazines, of course. So, but digital age, it's our present, it's going to be our future. We heard James talking about that too on his keynote speech. So my question, because I love magazines like everybody, I think that is with me here in the conference, how are magazines dealing with it? What transformations were magazines forced to make? And my really question is, are magazines able to maintain their identity? And discussion between community and clubs, Miglena, was really, I think it's really rich. It was something that I haven't thought about it yet, and I think that I'm going to be after this. So there are people on our conference that are not from magazine studies and are thinking about if they want to be magazine schoolers or work as long as other interests that they have. And I'm going to try to get them to us with the help of Holmes and Nice that designed the main characteristics of magazines like this. They target a precisely defined group of readers. They base their content on the expressed and perceived needs, desires, hopes, and fears of their readers. They develop a bond of trust with their readerships that James told us it is really important for the future, the trust. They foster community-like interactions that Miglen already told us that maybe it's not like that anymore. And they can respond quickly to social and readers' changes. So what about now? The truth is there is no blueprint for success. This is not me saying it, it's Johnson and Brigitte on the 3rd edition of their book. So there is no blueprint for success. Each platform offers its own opportunities, a whole new world of readers who can access content. If the content is open, everybody, not just the magazine community, can access that content. So it's really a work in progress. So how are the old magazines doing online? These are just 4 titles that everybody knows. It's People, National Geographic, National Geographic, Rolling Stone, and then Men's Health here on the bottom corner. What did we lose with these titles on digital? First of all, the luxury, the sensorial experience, holding a magazine and holding an object that is not going to change, okay? It's ours, we can keep it, and it's going to be like it is until the end of their days, okay? Or its days, it's just one. Then we cannot show, oh, look, I'm here, I'm on the cover, and I'm going to be on the cover for the rest of my life because this magazine is going to the library and it's going to be there, okay? As Abramson said on Mapping the Magazine edition, the volatility of the technological environment presents a huge challenge for both the producer and consumer. How do we want to consume magazines? Because it distorts, even violates the implicit magazine reader social contract, and it's true. So let's go to my microfield that I've been studying, like Teresa said, news magazines. It's really I have a long story with news magazines. For me, they are fascinating because they are a kind of publication, I'm going to say like that lives between 2 worlds, okay? They are hybrid. They are not newspapers, they are not, some of them don't call them magazines, like The Economist, for instance, that is one of the most successful ones. They started with Time magazine, at least the modern model started with Time magazines in 1923. And they are considered by the Journalism Studies School as very respectful. So usually they work on newspapers, they worry about the end of newspapers, and then they study sometimes also news magazines because they are similar, okay? And the other world, magazine world, is not so interesting for them. But news magazines have really a magazine, what we can call a magazine cardinal sin. If we go back to the characteristics of news magazines, what differentiates magazines is targeting a special interest group. And news magazines don't do that. That's why they are near the general newspapers, the daily newspapers specifically, and the weekly newspapers. So I wanted to know what is happening with this special kind of magazine, that it's not just only magazine, when she loses its body and has to go to enter the digital world and has to do something about it. So what I have done right now is designing a content analysis grid. And I focus on the covers of news magazine. That is the object that I specifically have been studying for years. And then I went to the home pages of those news magazines that are the most similar structure to covers. At least it was what I thought. And I focus on a case study, the representation of the American President Donald Trump. I chose Time and Newsweek. They are the oldest titles. And I studied January to March 2019. That were a period that had two specific topics that gave me a lot of material to work on Trump. It was the government shutdown that started on December and then go on for the first months, and the disclosure right down the end on March of the Mueller report that put an end to the discussion about the Russian influence on the American elections. These numbers that are here, 18 covers and 24 screenshots, start speaking with us, because when I decided to do this study, I thought about getting once a week a screenshot to do a connection to the weekly news magazine. But I discovered that they are not weekly news magazines anymore. They are sometimes weekly news magazines, because as you can see, we have just 18 covers. Both Time and Newsweek are now betting on two numbers in one. And that's why there are that difference of 6 between the covers and the screenshots. It was not because I forgot some. It was really like that. From January to March, I just had 18 covers and 20 and could get 24 screenshots. The screenshots were always taken on Mondays and between 9 to 10 a.m. Okay, starting on 7 January and starting. Okay, what did I find? First, the covers, of course. There were 3 Trump covers. The first one on January, the last 2 on March. I'm wondering a lot if that fruit represents Trump. At least it seems to me that it is. Each of these covers could take us to the narratives that are behind them, but I'm interested on going digital, so let's go to Newsweek first. This is a very aggressive Trump, as you can see. I have to tell you that I got a bit depressed with this work, because he almost always look like this. Here there are comics about it, of course, but even on digital, it was what I found. He's never smiling, just have 2 cases, whatever. Okay, so these were the covers. I had a 5th cover with just a secondary topic. Okay, it was not the main topic on the cover. And then let's go to online. Online was a headache, because I got from the 24 homepages 78 references to Trump, 33 on Time, 45 on Newsweek, an average of 3. And some of the homepages, too, more specifically, have 7 different references to Trump. And when I was saying that I went to a field that I don't know, I didn't even know how to get the screenshot, because what I find out is that there are, depending on if you do on a laptop or on a PC, if we wait for the ads to close, or if they are on a bar, we get different screenshots, okay? And I tried to get the most similar to get to in order to be able to compare them. But when I start going through it, I discovered that there are some, in some cases, there was something else there that shouldn't be, or something that was not there. All right. 29 were ad photos, a little bit more on Newsweek, 16, 13 on Time. Trump this is the same number, 99. Trump is alone inequally 9 times on Newsweek and Time, which counts for 62%. And as I was saying, in almost all the photos, Trump looks or serious or annoyed. The number is it's curious because, as you have seen from the covers, the Time covers were more artistic, and the Newsweek's ones were aggressive. But on their own pages, Trump is even more serious and annoyed on Time than on Newsweek. So this was the only exception on the 24 analyzed that had no references to Trump. I thank this homepage because when I got there, I said, oh God, I can go to the next one. And now, please, ladies and gentlemen, let me share with you my 27 references to Trump. This one is on Newsweek. I counted everything, not just news, but opinion too. Because if I was not that crazy, I would have less things to analyze. And if you follow the arrows, the curving arrows, you can find out this. And I'm going to say something about this a bit later. And this was the second one from Time. They are from different, they are from 4 February and 25 March. And as you can see, it was. Now, if we are going to compare the cover to the home page, what I discovered, and it was because I haven't gone to analyzing my beloved covers for a while, and what I found out is that nowadays news magazines do something that they didn't do in the past. That is always, at least from January to March 2000, they had just 1 or 2 cover lines. This usually in the past was not very usual. There were more cover lines. And on pages headlines, 9, they always had 9 different headlines, graphically divided always the same way. And it seems that there is in terms of design, it's incomparable. They are really completely different things. We have sophisticated photos and illustrations on the covers, and we just have plain new report photos on the home pages, sometimes in Time with video attached, but in Newsweek, not even that. Starting our conclusions, I know that my time is finishing, Teresa. News magazines covers. I discovered that my concept, my also beloved concept of dispositive that comes from Michel Foucault, couldn't be used on pages. They are too rigid, they are fragment, they are disposable, okay? News magazines, as with a cover of a news magazine comes as a, we can read it something, it is worth it by itself, as Miglena so well showed us before, but nothing happens like that. And there is a very terrific problem for scholars, because what I'm showing, and I'm going to just show a little more, we can't access anymore. It's not there. We can access piece by piece, but we can't see the homepage at that time when I took the screenshot. So it's a challenge. And they are, why I'm saying they are disposable. I don't want to be a bad girl to news magazines online, but I think that just being disposable, it's the only answer to things like this. It's not the same. Can you see the same photo in the same place serving two different news? I can't understand how this, and it's from January, it's a month from one to another one. I don't know. So everybody have forgotten the January 7 homepage, of course, it's not there anymore. And then I think it was just nobody knows that happened. And I found this. Can you see that the title is the same one on the left and on the center part? I couldn't believe, I had to read 2 or 3 times to believe in it. And this is a completely different question, but it helps us to see how similar, so how boring they are. Because it's not the same photo, okay? But it's in the same place, the same protagonists for different news. Boring. So in my conclusions, I would say that these magazines are really struggling to preserve their identity on digital. They really need to differentiate themselves from daily digital newspapers. And they have to look more like magazines if they can survive, at least with their own nature. They have to be more creative and more diversified. Those are my conclusions. Just to let a hope note, but I got this from 3 days ago, and they are different right now. Time and Newsweek, and Time specifically. There are not 9 topics anymore. There are 3 in this one, and in that one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Much better than 9. Oh, sorry, it's the last one, as you could see. I believe that digital needs imagination. I think this Time cover is brilliant, just brilliant, and I can imagine how to do that on digital without putting the cover on the magazine there. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Carla. Now we just move to Tim Holmes. Probably most of you know Tim Holmes very well, but I will make a brief presentation just in case someone is new to this magazine studies field. So Tim Holmes is a senior lecturer at the School of Journalism, Media and Culture of Cardiff University in the United Kingdom, where he is the coordinator of the magazine option of the postgraduate diploma in journalism. He is the founder of Mapping the Magazine conferences that now reaches its 6th edition and has been publishing on magazine journalism for many years. The most recent work will be launched next Friday at 5:30. I'm not tired to remind you. And the book is co-authored with Milena Sternadori, so they are together in this session too. And it's the handbook of magazine studies. Now we will be talking about a new taxonomy of magazine genres. Thank you, Tim. It's your turn now.
Okay, thank you. And just let me go into sharing screen. Okay, is that visible all right?
Is it? It is visible.
Okay, see if I can make it work like that too. Is that okay still?
It is in the mode, the presenter mode, but it's okay. If you could put it, because we see all the slides.
Okay, I can
change the mode.
Right, I'll go back to that. Okay, so this is a paper that is based on the idea of needing to think differently. So those of us who study magazines or create magazines, and particularly those of us who educate magazine journalists of the future, we can't afford to get stuck in the past glories of a golden age or a supposed golden age. We need to think about magazines in different ways, and particularly because our readers, the audience, the community of interest, the community of consumption have changed how they consume media, as we've seen from the keynote and indeed from the two presentations so far. And they also create their own media. And we need to think about the effects that that has on what we do and what we teach. So this is a new taxonomy. It's not a fixed system. It's more an approach to thinking about magazine media. And for that purpose, I've just devised these three names: the magazine, as we know it, the megazine, and the metazine. And I'll go through those in turn. So I have to say that this presentation, this paper, builds on chapter 1 of the Handbook of Magazine Studies, which has been mentioned a few times, and which is going to have its official launch on Friday, and some work I did before in the book Magazine Journalism. In the chapter in the Handbook of Magazine Studies, I chart it against the 4 industrial revolutions proposed by Klaus Schwab and give examples of how each revolution has corresponding developments in the magazine sector. This talk has its basis in an ECATI talk, which I gave to students at the Universität Lusofana, and I subsequently developed in a paper for the Transnational Magazines Conference at Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz, and I think at least one person in the audience will have seen that paper too. And it is still evolving. So this is the latest evolution of it. So this is just a quick, I'm not going to go into Schwab's 4 phases of the Industrial Revolution in any depth, but this is the 4 phases that he proposes, which are basically just developments in the way that we produce and create things, leading into the current age of artificial intelligence, which again, as James Hughes said in his keynote, is kind of not widely understood, or perhaps understood in many different ways. There is a key quote that I want you to bear in mind, which is related to the 3rd phase of the Industrial Revolution, and it's from Marshall McLuhan, and it is this: the obsession with the older patterns of mechanical one-way expansion from centers to margins is no longer relevant to our electric world. Electricity does not centralize, but decentralizes, which is kind of arguing against the top-down theory of information transmission and communications, I think. And this quote will come back in at the end, so I'm just briefing you about it now. So to look at the 3 categories that I'm proposing, the magazine, the original category, in my categorization of this, there is still a major focus on print, as predicated by our esteemed colleague, Professor Sameer Husni, whose view is that if it's not produced in print on paper, it cannot be a magazine. So I'm agreeing with him in a way. There is a category which suits that, the category of the magazine. It's still live and launching, and there is a lively print-based indie sector, which again, James Hughes touched on in his keynote, noting that where major players pull out of a sector, there is likely to be smaller indie companies coming in and filling that demand that's left behind. And there's also at least one paper touching on this tomorrow. For an in-depth look at the indie sector, I recommend chapter 7 of the Handbook of Magazine Studies, produced by Megan Le Mesurier. In this category, digital and social media are used in limited and very strategic ways. And my example is actually also an example that was cited by James Hughes. And you'll notice actually there are considerable parallels between, well, connections between what he said and what I'm saying, which quite surprised me because I wasn't expecting it. But my example is Private Eye, the news magazine, fortnightly news magazine produced in the UK, independent and only available in print. It doesn't put any of its content online. So it is strong journalism unavailable online. And if we look at this is data that comes from an organization called PAMCO in the UK, which measures the reach of different platforms that magazine brands use. And it shows the overlap between platforms. And as we can see with this, there is absolutely no overlap because Private Eye is only produced in print. For other categories, this overlap information is really useful. But Private Eye is thriving. It's a news magazine that is in demand still and has found a way of surviving. So as an example of a magazine, that print category, this is a really good example. The second category, the magazine, the print element is just one ingredient in a larger and more complex matrix. So the diversification into digital editions, mobile apps, social media, podcasts, smart speaker apps, events and other things are all essential items in this mix. And for example, again, this was an example cited by James, but this is the latest issue of Good Food magazine, which is a BBC brand, but actually produced by Immediate Media. So the BBC licenses it, and I don't know, this is the latest issue. I hope you can see it's particularly relevant to our current situation because one of the recipes in it is for a giant Portuguese custard tart, which I assume they mean pastel de nata, but are they ever giant? And the reason why it's a good example of the magazine is because it had to expand into, well, it decided to expand, the publishers decided to expand it to develop new platforms after a business review showed that reliance on print alone would be insufficient. So you can see from that little dial the various things that have been added to the brand. There's the magazine, the live events, which are major events taking place in massive exhibition centres. They've moved into books. They license the brand overseas. They were quite late to developing a website, but it has since proved really popular. They've developed a television brand on UK TV. They've developed apps, and in the app that they've created, they were actually much more advanced and much earlier into it than they were with the website, and they've kind of pioneered that use, and they've gone into branded consumer products. They've also gone into smart speaker apps, which if you think about it, if you're in the kitchen making something, you don't necessarily want to have your iPad or phone there getting covered in butter and flour. So being able to speak to a smart speaker is a really strategic decision there. And there's also a live experience built in, the Good Food Kitchen experience, which is still being developed, where you would be able to go and see people developing the recipes that go into the magazine and then eat them in an associated restaurant. So that was their strategy. This is this graphic was from another review in 2014, which showed that profit was still very reliant on the print magazine. You can see the big blue circle is where most of the predicted profit was going to come from if they continued with their existing print strategy. There was a little bit of action with the website, but mobile, live events and digital partnerships all were quite small slices of that pie. So again, the review showed that if they continued to rely on print to this extent, that big blue circle would shrink, and without specific action, the other sectors would not enlarge, would not grow to fill that gap. So they developed a new strategy, which I won't go into because there's no time, and it's not immediately relevant to what I'm talking about. But their new strategy, which is the big pie chart here, has allowed them to expand the other areas of profitability quite considerably. So the reliance on the print magazine is very much less. There's much more coming from the website, much more from mobile, and also live events. And it's this aspect really that I think is interesting, because here's an example of that kind of live event diversification, which we could all do tomorrow. So, on Friday. So on Friday, there is going to be an online Success with Sourdough class, which you can pay £10 to attend. It's a live event. It's also e-commerce. Now, this may seem superficial and easy to dismiss as secondary or even irrelevant to a consumer brand like Good Food. But it has to be seen, I think it has to be seen and understood as part of a carefully constructed whole. And this particular event on its own, I think, raises questions about affordances that people have with the magazine, about leisure, about culture, about social trends, and about authenticity, particularly when related to sourdough bread, because that kind of bread has all sorts of associations and connotations of authenticity. There's the authenticity of the bread, of the tutor who is an expert in this, and of the brand as well. So I think this is actually something that needs to be considered when one is studying or analyzing magazines, all of those different elements. And it also applies to news magazines such as The Economist. So again, this is just a sample showing the different platforms that The Economist is on. We all know it as a print magazine, but if you look on the side there, you can see it's on WeChat, Weibo, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and so on. And another interesting thing that James Hughes said in his keynote was that The Economist will only engage with a platform if it thinks there is a chance of getting subscriptions out of it or some kind of profit in sight. So my main point is that if you're studying this kind of magazine, you really can't study it in isolation. Every element of it needs to be studied to gain a holistic overview of it, because each element will be designed to follow the tone and style for the brand, and each element needs to add a tangible benefit to the audience or community of interest or community of consumption, which again was translated into platform-focused content within in the keynote that we heard. So you can't just look at one thing. I think you have to look at all of those different elements. And certainly as educators, we should realize that. But if we're scholars as well, we need to realize that. They're not secondary. They are part of the whole process. And as Professor Maria Moutinho said, the magazine, or this version of the magazine, has social, cultural, and economic aspects to it, so that kind of interdisciplinarity is essential in studying magazines. So it has to be all taken into account. Then this leads me into the third category, if you like, the metazine. So it is a metaphor for a magazine, a meta-representation of the form. And I've just got two examples here, which are both Facebook closed groups aimed at very specific communities. So they're taking that idea of the niche, the community of interest, and the community of consumption, and applying it to within Facebook. So the first, the one on the left, the British Motorcycle Mechanics, was set up by one person in February 2015. It's a closed group. Every member everybody who applies to be a member has to be approved by the founder, Greg Schofield. And so far there are over 15,000 people who've been approved. And that's a number that is consistently growing. And that would be a really respectable figure, circulation figure for a specialized magazine. Its purposes are very clear. They're stated on a sort of introductory page: to provide a teaching forum, to give experienced mechanics a place to associate, to provide a forum for all members to interact with fellowship, which means it's based on relationships and knowledge exchange. And I think that gives it great shared characteristics with what we think of as the conventional magazine, and indeed what scholarship and research into the magazine form shows to exist, that kind of bond between the creator and the or the content itself. And this site is like a permanently switched on magazine that is created by 15,000 people, many of whom are globally acknowledged experts in their field, and some of whom are just enthusiasts or beginners. The other one on the page is the Epiphone Les Paul Owners Group, which has 31,000 members, which again would represent a more than respectable circulation for a specialist magazine. And again, it's like a permanently on version of Total Guitar or Guitar World, but instead of having to wait a month to find out whether a particular brand or model of guitar, amplifier, pickup, or effect pedal is going to be reviewed, users can just create their own content immediately and have it commented on or augmented by others in that community. And all of these kind of interactions are very magazine-like. And the other aspect of both of these examples is their inbuilt diversity. So because the platform is global, it opens itself up to people from around the world, and indeed there are people from around the world in both of these groups, and they're offering their own opinions from their own backgrounds, from their own circumstances. So if we look at the characteristics of the metazine and compare them to the characteristics of a magazine, conventionally thought of magazine, in these examples, they target a precisely defined group of users. The content is entirely based on the expressed and perceived needs of that defined group. There is a bond of trust with and between the users. There are community-like interactions between the founders, the readers, young readers, and without the community there would be no interaction, and as noted, no content. And it is the group that determines what the content is. So that aspect of co-creation is a key element in this, and finding ways to harness that or to promote that kind of co-creation is, I think, going to be a significant challenge that we have to look at as educators and scholars. And finally, final thought, there aren't really any conclusions to this. There's nothing neat and tidy to kind of bring it together. But I come back to that quote from McLuhan, which I cited earlier, about centralizing and decentralizing. And I combine it with a quote from Henry Jenkins, the cultural scholar, about convergence being, should not be understood primarily as a technological process, bringing together multiple media functions. Conversion represents a cultural shift as consumers are encouraged to seek out new information and make connections among dispersed media content. And you can add to that and create their own media content. And this leads to an interesting thought, which is actually that the site of the convergence and consumption and creation is the device. We create our own collection of content, and thus the device becomes the magazine. And it's already been mentioned a couple of times, the original definition of a magazine comes from the Arabic word for a storehouse, where things are stored together, which kind of brings us in a full circle somehow from the magazine to the metazine. And there's lots more to think about in all of this. There's much more to study in it. There's more to think about, to draw conclusions about, to try and incorporate into what we do somehow. But really, all I'm trying to do is just kind of open up different pathways of thinking about what a magazine is, what it can be, and what it might have to be in the future, bearing in mind all of the pressures coming to bear on that form. And that's it.
Thank you, Tim, for your presentation. Now, I was supposed to read the questions that were being shared in the chat, but probably this is useful because you can read your own, the questions that were addressed to the three of you. Milena, you have a question from Tim. I don't know if you can read. I can
yes,
read it.
Yes.
I can read it to you, and then you can answer.
Yeah.
So, or you read it and then you go ahead and read it maybe.
Okay. Well, I think Tim's question was about whether magazines still serve to construct personal identities. So the example he mentioned was carrying a print magazine used to be a way of declaring one's membership in a particular community. Do you think the commodities associated with magazines perform the same role in creation enhancement of personal identity? I would say absolutely yes. They do. And creating a personal identity is not necessarily something that is opposed to consumerism. In fact, creating a personal identity generally is quite expensive. I mean, it could be done in all kinds of different ways, anything from a hairstyle, which is expensive, to tattoos, which are expensive, to carrying certain objects. And again, in the case of magazines, I think that is very much the case. I wanted to share, I added a slide to my presentation with a very specific quote that I thought would be really interesting to show. Here it is. I hope you can see it. Oh, I'm sorry. Not there. Okay, here it is. So this is from Slate, which is an online magazine, and it is a review of the New Yorker tote. And so as you can see, it has multiple multiple ways of constructing identity. The example has to do with Alex Morgan, who is co-captain of the US women's soccer team and who was photographed getting on a yacht and carrying a New Yorker tote. So the argument is that you're smart. That's what it suggests. You're non-frivolous, but it is also a fashion statement. So it is, all of those are ways of constructing identity, but especially when something becomes a fashion statement, I think it has a particularly strong consumerism connotations.
Okay.
Would you like me to?
No, Jair Ratner also has put in a question. He says, I think it is very interesting Milena approach to the monetizing of identitary processes in relation to magazines. For this purpose, magazines have to be trendy. What is this commodization different from other ones like MAGA hats or museum pictures, for example?
I think they're very similar. Just like I own personally, magazine branded products, I've also purchased memory products from museums and so forth. Sometimes, they are ones that can be used to construct identity publicly, and sometimes they can be used to construct identity privately. I think in both cases, they have monetary value and serve specific purposes. They don't necessarily only signal membership in a community. If you're not close to other community members, so for example, if you wear a New Yorker tote in West Texas, I might be the only one in Lubbock, Texas to carry a New Yorker tote, but it still signals something to those people who know what the New Yorker is. Private purposes, I have a New Yorker puzzle two of them actually. And I told my son when we completed the puzzle that this is your future workplace. And now he has the New Yorker puzzle hanging in his room, and he calls it my future workplace. So one material object led to, creating an aspiration, I hope.
This led me to the question I put in is, this to sum up is, do you think that to share it online, to share the content in online, for instance, to share the content of the New Yorker magazine, does it also makes my identity and it goes to this strategy of status? Is it a way or it's completely different? What do you think?
I think it's quite different. Maybe it's because of my personal experience, but I have shared New Yorker articles or other magazine or newspaper articles on Facebook. And generally I get maybe 1 or 2 likes. It doesn't seem, I don't know if anyone even notices. I don't know if the Facebook algorithm or other social media algorithms even display that content. So I have no control over who sees it and doesn't see it, versus if I have an object that I carry around to construct identity, I know who is going to see it. I don't know how they're going to interpret it necessarily, but I know who is going to see it. And when something becomes a fashion statement, I think, sharing an article online versus making a fashion statement, they're quite dissimilar. Unless you take a picture of yourself wearing a New Yorker tote.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I hope it makes sense.
I don't know if there's more questions for you. I don't see them.
I don't think so.
Okay. Let's then move to Carla. I think there's a question from Tim to Carla. No, where is it? I'm sorry.
I have 3 questions and 2 to the team. So,
Okay.
Mrs. Chair, you must start getting
I'm
this.
sorry. See, at 12:22.
I can manage my questions because I have it here. I have yours, but I have one before. Let me see here.
It's from Tim. There is a theory that print magazine covers, especially those.
Let me go from the first one to the last one. The first one is yours. We tend to say that there is a print and digital version of the same magazines. If in your person, why do you think this happens? Well, the characteristics of are these versions complementary? I think they are a challenge to magazine identity. Okay, these differences. And I think that, as I said, I think that at least I'm looking just at news magazines, so I can't speak in behalf of all the magazines. But I think in the specific case of, and I don't think that it's happening the same in other magazines, but in the specific case of news magazines, they are losing their identity. It was not very strong because of that. Being divided, and I even think that they are going stronger in their identity on print and losing it online. Okay, Jair, I adore this question, Jair. So I got Trump all over the place because his strategic communication was successful, and you are right in occupying the world. But your question is, do you believe that this strategy runs for or against his political aims? It's very weird. No, it's not. He was very much. There is something very curious because I don't know. I think that it should be someone that is over the print edition and the online edition. But the truth is that if you look from on that time span for the covers, you see more delicate covers over Trump on Time and more aggressive covers on Time on Newsweek. But it doesn't reflect on the site. I don't know if it. I think that Trump is just like idyllic for someone and hated by other ones. I don't know if magazines have strength to help or not. And I think there is one last one from Tim. Those that deal with topic.
It's about Tyson with Angelo Jair.
You notice in your analysis, yes. There are some, if they can be treated more like posters. Yes, Time, for instance, always put their covers and Newsweek too, but it gives a special place to the cover, and always do a big piece on their cover for the digital. That's very, very interesting. I thought it was very interesting. Please, Tim.
I don't know which question. I put a question for you, Tim. Just because when I was reading yours, I pre-prepared these questions. So you of course you mentioned McLuhan. I don't know if you were inspired by this game he did with the word message. But anyway, how does in your categories the media specificity is thought about? How do you think this impacts?
Well, I just think that Marshall McLuhan has some useful insights, and some of those, some of his well-known quotations or theories, I think are still relevant as just a lens to focus on things in a slightly different way. I'm not sure that I buy his entire philosophy, but I think he did have some insights that you can still draw on and kind of use in interesting ways to just analyze things slightly differently from a slightly different perspective. I'm not sure that media over content is quite what I'm getting at. I think I still think content is key and the most important thing, but you have to incorporate all those different media into what you're doing and use them in appropriate ways. So again, you can kind of adapt what he said. You could also start to apply the idea of hot media and cold media into how you look at things as well, which would be a really interesting paper to do another time, perhaps.
Okay. You have also a question from Jair.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Jair, and I don't think there is any answer to it yet in terms of thinking about it commercially. So it's very tempting always to think of magazines purely as commercial operations, and of course, if we are journalism educators, we're educating and training people to go out into the industry and make a living out of what they're doing. And clearly, with the kind of metazine that I described there, that's not something that's going to happen. But there is something about what those sites are doing that I think we can draw useful lessons from and incorporate into our teaching and into business practice. I think there are certain ways in which Metazine content helps helps third parties to monetize things, because one of the characteristics is people recommending particular consumer goods, or in the case of the guitar things, particular brands of I don't know, pickup or something, which may well help the pickup manufacturers monetize without advertising and without any kind of promotion. So it's monetizing something. There are ways of monetizing something, but ways of monetizing content creation, I think that is a conundrum that still has to be cracked.
Okay, I don't know if there's, it seems there are no more questions. I don't know if anyone, but we are just right on time. Thank you all, team Carl and Milena, for sharing with us your ideas. And so we will finish this session, and I just have to remember you that the second panel will start at 2:30 in the afternoon, and that you have to access it with the different link. So don't forget, don't use this link again. You have to go to the afternoon link of the session. So for those who are in the time to lunch, which probably is not everyone, have a good lunch, and see you all in the afternoon at 4:30. So see you.
I just want to say that it's 2:30 that we started, and we have the chat, and now we are going really to close, and after, in the afternoon at the breaks, we are going to be open again. Bye-bye.